Well, good afternoon. I'm Richard Earle, and I'm joining you from the Canadian Institute of Stress in Toronto. Actually, it occurs to me I should have said good afternoon, good evening, or good night. We have a number of participants here from outside Canada. In fact, I think there's two psychologists, one from Brazil and one from New Zealand, as well as someone from China, and they're up very late. I think it's probably 2 o'clock in the morning in China, and also from France, Saudi Arabia, and of course from the U.S. as well as Canada. And I'm very pleased that several of our recent graduates from the Institute's certification program, the Stress and Wellness Consulting Program, are also joining us. So I look forward to a good session with you. And, you know, it's particularly a pleasure to have a broad array of international folks with us. Cultures are quite challenging. In fact, I think it's one of the most enjoyable parts of my work is to share the results of our research, our applied research especially, in a wide variety of settings, and to home in on basic, powerful principles. Not simply about the organizational dynamics of stress, but about the psychological and the physiological, biochemical aspects, which are common really around the world. It's a matter of then adapting the way in which we communicate, perceive, make use of those concepts that is a very enjoyable challenge for me. Now, today, we'll be muting all participants because there's quite a number of people here. We couldn't engage in the kind of conversation we have in our smaller training programs, but you can use the chat box on the screen to send questions or to share ideas, suggestions. At the end of my presentation, I'll make a point of doing my best to respond to what you're sharing. Now, today, our focus is on change management. And this seemed to be an appropriate starting point for our webinar series because although it's only a part of our SWC training or our applied work, it became quite clear that there's a gap in the corporate sector that's not being well met by shown by the fact that, first of all, about 68% of all senior HR professionals in the business world and in government bodies also saying that chronic stress is the #1 threat to the productive well-being of their people. And yet, only 32% of those same senior HR folks are saying they feel they have a practical kit of tools readily to hand to help them deal with not just stress, but in particular the stress of rapid corporate change. The second reason we selected change management is simply because here at the Institute, it is probably the top focus for both our applied research as well as for intervention programs. And when we contrasted that with what our survey of stress consultants around the world, not simply our graduates, but more generally, were saying, namely that the focus on change management is a relatively minor aspect of their work. And this was puzzling, leading to today's webinar to hopefully encourage and support a broader array of stress consultants to be of value in today's change environment. And the third reason we focused on it is change management is both professionally and financially probably the most rewarding of all initiatives that you can join with in the corporate sector. So my purpose in our time together is to encourage stress consultants to basically rethink, repurpose their existing toolkit. because it is basically what they need to be of even more value corporately. And just moving to our next slide. There we are. Well, the meat of my presentation is in this slide, sections A and B. I've already mentioned the consultant's opportunity for focus and then repurposing the consultant's toolkit. Section C today is on the underlying themes that weave their way through many of the resources, the comments that I have to share with you. Let's go back to Area A, the consultant's opportunity. We've already talked about the supply-demand gap for these professionals, many like yourselves, to be active more frequently in this sector. And in Section A, I've decided to focus in on ERP. Many of you are aware of it, Enterprise Resource Programming, which seeks to knit together on one coherent IT platform all the sources and types of information available in a company about its operations so that its people can use it much more efficiently. And I've selected ERP because in many ways it lays bare, most bare and visible, the costs that occur when the people factor is not taken sufficiently into account in implementing, frankly, any change program. And in Section A2, briefly I'll highlight what recent research is showing about executive aims and metrics in placing value on investing in supporting, improving the people factor in their own organizations. In summary, they are aiming to create a more change-able, a more can-do staff group to meet the challenges they see every day. And in A3, I'll highlight just briefly, I think one slide is all, some of the core results of Institute programming in the business sector around the world about how our principles and tools seem, in most cases, to successfully meet the targets and metrics that executives are concerned about. In the consultant's toolkit section, Section B, I'm going to address 5 aspects, 5 resourcefulness factors in the toolkit. One is, what are the core change ability skills that employees must have and executives must count upon in dealing effectively with change in truly a win-win way. I'll step sideways for a minute. This concept of win-win underlies my whole presentation. As many of you know, I am trained as a psychologist, and much of my life is spent as a helping professional. And so my concern is not simply for business results, but equally for the human benefits of the work that we do at the Institute. And really, the main challenge of the past 30 years of my work has been to link the human and the business challenges and benefits together, to knit them together because they truly are interdependent. But we must do that in very practical, step-by-step ways that employees can appreciate and executives can buy into. Second of all, we'll look at diagnostics. How do you evaluate current strengths and risks or vulnerabilities in those changeability skills in any given corporation? Third, results are job one. Indeed, if we are to be valued and introduced into the mix of day-to-day operations in a company, we need to be clear, and our client needs to be clear, that we are equally pursuing business as well as human case results. 4, synergy, a great challenge. My own experience with the Institute is leading the executive coaching program, and I know that often the greatest risk or weakness in change management is that the top executive team have not taken very simple steps to ensure that from the boardroom to the shop floor, the change program is taken to heart and made practical use, put to practical use. And finally, a few words I'll share about a blended learning strategy to deliver these tools throughout the organization. And finally, the themes that underlie the rest of my time with you is to focus, first of all, on reaching the decision makers, ensuring that they appreciate the evidence base, the solutions focus of what you're offering. You know, companies really do not buy programs. They buy solutions. And reaching that mindset is a major concern. Second of all, relating, again, consulting for results, positioning your services so that executives can readily appreciate and buy in. And C3, repurposing. Your existing toolkit is probably relatively ready to go to meet these change challenge demands very effectively. But I'll offer you just several ways of rethinking, repositioning your toolkit to make sure that happens effectively. So, into Section A, the consultant's opportunity, starting with ERP. It's generally acknowledged that roughly only 23% of ERP projects fully succeed. Namely, they deliver the desired functionalities, they're on time and on budget. The remaining 77% fall short on one or more of those factors. And in fact, if you look at item B on this slide, fully 50% of these cost and time overrun costs are directly attributable to people costs. And in section C on this slide, you can see some of the ways in which the people factor becomes a stumbling block to success when a fully can-do, will-do people resource is not in place. Major avoidable costs absolutely occur. Now, it's not simply that these are factors in change programs, in ERP programs generally, but across the board, senior executives concerned to be able to rely on a can-do, will-do staff has been a focus of our investigation as well as several other organizations as to what is it that executives are looking for. What are their criteria? What do they most want to take root in their people? Clearly, that's the entryway to our being of service to them. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that employee satisfaction, engagement. And when you contrast it with the right-hand side, much more important than reducing disability costs or drug benefit costs, satisfaction, engagement, and ensuring that those resources are attached directly to key performance indicator targets. To today's company, especially at the executive level, health is an applied capacity. It's something they value, as you and I would, because it's simply of value. However, more specifically in the business environment, does it help us meet our targets? And third, improving corporate talent turnover and recruitment success. The better employees regard their company as a place to work, the less likely they are to leave, and the more likely word of mouth they are to promote, to recruit other people joining their company. So the people factor, reducing the people cost is more widely spread and broadly based in today's company than simply in the case of managing change. So it's all well and good to know that what decision makers value, but why do they value it? Well, frankly, because most executives, managers, and frontline workers see the impacts of stress on their performance, their well-being, and that those impacts are accelerating, becoming stumbling blocks to both personal and corporate success. So I want to share briefly a model of how stress imposes these can-do, will-do, changeability stumbling blocks. We all know that when changes are announced, they're never objectively real. They're subjective. They're perceived, they're interpreted, and they're forecast into the future, both by individuals and by whole work teams. The predictions of the future, in fact, become part of the culture in a work team. Whenever people experience ambiguity, uncertainty, what's happening around us, how is this going to affect me, uncertainties begin to add up. And humans, both psychologically and in fact in terms of brain physiology, humans are built never, ever, ever to respond to multi-uncertainties by saying, oh boy, this is changing, I wonder where the opportunities are here. Nonsense. Humans respond by feeling, initially, by feeling threatened. This 3-to-1 ratio you see on the screen reflects the fact that in every human language, in every language around the world, the ratio of negative to positive adjectives is 3-to-1. People are quite simply more adept, more skilled, more accustomed to seeing the negative in uncertain circumstances. So, feeling threatened, it's no wonder that quite automatically the level of stress in each of us rises, both to handle the new work demands, the additional work demands, but also to protect ourselves against whatever these ambiguous threats are. And as work stress builds up, because stress is biochemically and therefore emotionally additive, as it builds up, it impacts levels of health and effectiveness. And from a win-win corporate point of view, in area 3 on your slide, gradually work satisfaction, levels of satisfaction begin to decline in the workforce. And as we discovered at the Institute in our early work on biomarkers of human aging, we found that it's not stress per se that accelerates aging. It's when people experience high levels of stress with relatively low return on investment of that stress energy. When they experience relatively low satisfaction and high stress, then people begin to disengage from their relationships. And at work, this shows up in poor communication with coworkers, with managers, and simply sharing the information that's needed. You know, in a marriage at home, when stress is high and satisfaction is low, people gradually disengage. They begin to care less. They pull back. And 30 years experience has taught me that most of us are more married to our work life than we are, not saying this is good or bad, than we are to our spouse or our family life. What that means is that for our sense of a coherent identity, emotional stability, this is more grounded in our work experience than it is for most of us in our home experience. So this cycle of change provoking uncertainty and stress, etc., can become chronic in many organizations. Well, it's all well and good to appreciate how it works, but conceptual models are of particular use when they highlight where solutions might lie. What can we do to intervene in this cycle in a way that's of benefit? This leads us directly to the corporate vital signs model that we follow in our programming at the Institute. You may notice I've picked the word vitality as a noun from, I think it was the Webster's Dictionary, and vitality is described as the ability to renew, endure, and succeed when challenged. And certainly today's climate of change is challenging most of us. You can see that in the corporate vital signs model, it's not simply levels of stress that predict decreases in productive well-being. It's how they interact, that return on investment concept, with work satisfaction, and also how they provoke levels of depressed vitality, body-mind well-being in people, which often spill over then into imbalance in work-life harmony. How these factors interact with and lead us to interpret the human capital management factors, quite simply our work environment, can, as mediated by these four factors in the middle, produce work relationships which are progressively disengaged and non-committed. And you'll see that win-win problem solving is a core focus for us. It is the bridge, it seems, between potential for problems and problem prevention or problem solution. More about that in just a minute. And we will take 1 minute for that slide I mentioned, simply to highlight that this vital corporation model has been very useful to us since roughly 1984, when we at the Institute undertook our first merger and acquisition assignment, which was not going well by the time we were invited to become involved. And in many of these assignments, we've had opportunity to do quite compelling research, looking at before and after measures in groups that we have intervened with, and in some few cases, comparing those 1 year later results in the pilot group with control groups, with matched control groups. So these statistics you see on the slide summarize some of the results that we're very proud to have been able to co-create, not simply with the corporate client, but with the people working in those organizations. Perhaps I'll highlight just one. The decrease in disability days that you see on the screen. 52% reduction in disability days 1 year after we launched our Making Change Successful program. And we did nothing medically to change the number of disability days lost. Where that came from, not surprising to most of us, is that for any given physical disability, whether it's heart attack, hypertension, various forms of psychological, emotional disabilities, the point at which people choose to return to work is highly variable. And that decision primarily turns on what they project their future being when they return to work. Are they returning to a sweatshop, or are they returning to an environment that by and large is win-win supportive, and where they work with other can-do, will-do staff? So our results are very much a co-creation with what people then do with the tools, the intervention perspectives that we offer. So let's turn to section B in our agenda, to the second part of the meat in this sandwich, namely the consultant's toolkit, and how to repurpose it in a way that, first of all, is perhaps more marketable and also more fully effective. You'll see that in our black pyramid diagram that the 4 changeability skills are highlighted on the left, all the way from helping people to better understand how it is and how normal it is, the ways in which change impact all of us, and to shift gears to develop more of a optimistic, winner outcome focused understanding of what this new situation means. Then, once that's in place at the base of the pyramid, skills to control the basics of stress, physical skills, because in fact, following Selye's definition of stress, it is physiological at the base and then emotional, psychological, etc. Stress control, relaxation techniques, yes, how to break the worry frustration cycle, how to let go of the good old days that we used to have in the old workplace. Getting stress, better control of your own stress accelerator. And the third level is work satisfaction. And this is a particular focus for us at the Institute. We've developed, I think, powerful perspectives and a number of practical tools that people can use both at work or in their marriage or in their role as a parent to increase their level of, in this case, work satisfaction by at least 30% by what they do individually. Whether or not the company helps them or changes in any way beyond the change program, individual initiative can improve work satisfaction, our research shows, by at least 30%. And once that building block is in place in the pyramid, then people are ready to consider, well, my satisfactions depend on other people, not just my manager, but my coworkers. Perhaps working more of an intentional, conscious win-win way would better support my own wins, my own satisfaction. Now, these changeability skills, obviously, are basic life skills and are of benefit if they're practiced. But to make them fully beneficial to the corporate employer, at the top of the pyramid is win-win problem solving. This is literally the bridge between the soft skills and the hard business results, creating literally a win-win outcome. In sharing this with you, there are a couple of basic perspectives that I think will help you understand what we mean by win-win problem solving. First of all, in the best of workplaces, best of times, there are always lose-lose conditions, whether they're in procedures, technology, in the work environment itself. Aspects which both drain drain satisfaction and raise stress in employees, but also cause the company literally to bleed dollars, to bleed productivity. Procedures which diminish both, loses. An example at the bottom of the screen, a very good example, is an airline's cargo division. Beautiful example of lose-lose, win-win. This airline, and by the way, I should mention that cargo handling is, for most airlines, their most profitable division. This airline had gone through major organizational and ERP-based changes. And when I was working with the cargo agents, and I asked them, do you by chance have any lose-lose problems? Not just loses for you, but you can see the company's losing too. And the very first one they mentioned was when the company reorganized, we changed major aspects of the procedures whereby we handle cargo. In many ways, it's a whole new ballgame. Difficult to adjust to, but we're being successful. The lose-lose came to light about 6 months ago. We have always, when the company hires new cargo agents, they're sent to company headquarters to be given basic cargo agent training. And then they come back to work on the job with us. And what we began finding was the company headquarters was still training them in the procedures that used to apply but have changed radically. So the lose for us in particular was we had to take about 30% of our time over 6 weeks to train these new folks in the new cargo handling procedures. Clearly a lose for us personally, definitely 30% of our time lost to the company, plus they had to rewrite the training program. There are many costs involved. The win-win was the company did upgrade the training program. The second point, beside the pyramid, is that these lose-lose weeds in the garden tend to increase and spread, especially during times of rapid change. Point 3, and this is critically important, and most senior executives would acknowledge this is true, that frontline staff are usually more fully and specifically and earlier knowledgeable about the weeds than are their bosses. And they're also aware, consistently I've found this, aware of what the win-win, the company has to win too, what the win-win solution might be. For example, I'll take the third example from the bottom of the screen. In a refinery's senior engineers. As you may know, in most companies, safety is important, and in the oil refining business, they're very important. The risks and costs are very significant. And as the engineers began to answer my question of, are there any lose-loses, they said, well, you know, we spend 1.8 days per week on safety meetings. And for a long time, we've known that the same risk containment objectives could be achieved with restructuring the hours of meetings and especially the way the agenda is managed. They put forward a proposal for doing exactly that. We went to senior management with 8 of their proposals, one of which on meeting hours. Management agreed, let's pilot test that new procedure. It was tested, evaluated rigorously, and 6 months later confirmed as standard operation. What was the win-win result? They reduced by 1.2 days per week the number of hours spent in inefficient safety meetings. So clearly, reducing stress, increasing satisfaction on the one hand, one win, bridging that, integrating it with conditions that would promote wins for the company are the heart of win-win problem solving, and it's there that you can expect leverage for both parties. Turning to the 4 changeability skills, which most of you probably practice in one way or another, there are a couple of, if you will, positioning, presentation themes that I'd like to recommend you strongly consider. The first has to do with the fact that most of us are indeed more married, more emotionally, interpersonally, identity-wise anchored in our work life. Not necessarily in our job or in the company, but our working life provides us major source of identity, affirmation of self. Now, that fact presents both the greatest challenge to successful change management, and the greatest resource for success. I'll share an anecdote with you. In that 1984 merger, it was actually an acquisition by one national grocery chain of another grocery food retailing chain. And I was talking over coffee with one of the middle managers from the acquired retail chain, getting his perceptions of what all these changes meant. And after a few more polite words, he said to me, you know, Dr. Earl, what this really feels like? It feels like my wife, in this case, the company I've worked for 20 years, it feels like my wife has said, I found someone sexier to sleep with, but would you kind of keep the house nice because I'll be back from time to time. This hit me between the eyes, the depth of emotion, and this has been confirmed for me bottom to top in the company. For most people, if you radically change a person's work-life marriage, you can expect a lot of anger, resentment, and resistance. Collaborative change is where it's at, and that is how the marriage to work concept becomes a resource. If your human side of the change management, the human side of ERP, emphasizes how to support and perhaps even improve the quality of your marriage with your work life, which is mostly mediated by your coworkers. If you can support that, then it becomes a very powerful asset to the change management process. Point number 2 is that these building blocks, all the way from understanding on upwards, are building blocks. They act progressively to remedy the stumbling blocks. For example, you cannot possibly teach a person effectively the skills to improve their level of satisfaction until they have stabilized somewhat, dealt with some of the resentments, dealt with the sleepless nights, etc., that may come with poor understanding and stress. It's only then that satisfaction can be tackled. And of course, that must be in place in turn before they can begin to appreciate that their satisfaction depends on the satisfaction of other people. Win-win work relationships. So the building block perspective is simple, but yet powerful. And at the heart of this, of our Making Change Successful training team development program, is an attitude shift amongst the employees to help them answer in a more positive way exactly what is my return on investment? What am I getting out of work? Because when in doubt, they will always, even if it's terrible, they will underestimate it even further as more terrible. So early in this understanding building block, we don't tell the employees that the changes are real. Trust me, they're real. We rely on something much more powerful. We enable the employees to discuss, to filter, and to tell each other which changes are most impactfully real, then leading to an examination of how I'm doing in coping with it, and an understanding that really should have soaked in for most of us about 20 years ago, but it hasn't for most of us, that my return on investment, my work-life ROI, is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily up to me. We have a little formula there for how we understand ROI, namely that it's the question of how many units of stress energy do I have to invest to get 1 unit of satisfaction. And that in turn is buffered by or intensified by the quality of our work relationships. This formula applies in ways that I could discuss at greater length in another setting. So the fourth point in the consultant's toolkit is to ensure that these changeability skills, while indeed they are useful in marriage or in parenting, many relationships, they're taught and learned with focus on the specific jobs that the people are doing in that company. And finally, we hope and in fact find that most employees going through the Making Change Successful program come to an awareness that co-creating win-win relationships and problem solving is probably the best insurance I can count on in safeguarding, advancing my future career prospects. So hopefully these several guidelines, plus the focus on where it's all going is the bridge into win-win problem solving, will help you rethink and perhaps repurpose some aspects of your stress consulting toolkit. Well, it's all well and good to have the toolkit in place, multi-tools you could apply, but where and how should they be applied? Hence the importance of change readiness diagnostics. You know, in most companies nowadays, most employees have been through at least 2 or 3 major changes in their work life, and some of the changeabilities have actually been learned. They just need to be reinforced, refocused. But in many cases, the reverse is true. Employees have simply become more jaded. You know, there's an old saying out there that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, no, frankly, that's just macho nonsense. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger if you learn from it. Our core diagnostic tool, which is Vitality Pro, when rolled up, produces the corporate vital signs aggregate report for a team or a company, recognizes that there are in every workforce some strengths and some particular vulnerability. And the training we deliver should not be one size fits all. It should be customized, focused to meet the profile of risk and strength in any given team. Hence, this model is very, very important. The feedback from the Vitality Pro profiles of employees, which of course are confidentially rolled up and summarized in the aggregate corporate vital signs, help us to focus in on the priority level, the intensity level, in fact, to some degree, the actual training tools that we use. So diagnostics on the left-hand side of this slide, interacting with the full consulting toolkit, is a very, not simply a helpful tool in designing an effective intervention. I'll step sideways here and confess something to you. Where much of our diagnostic tools came from were from a very painful underperforming experience the Institute had in 1985 and 86. We were working with one of the largest oil companies in Canada, and they had relocated their company headquarters, causing significant stress. Very good employer to work for, and you know, the better the prior marriage, when it becomes questioned, the more painfully stressful that marriage becomes. So the Institute was invited to bid for a contract, a stress control, stress management program. And we won that bid, and we began rolling out the program, getting very good results on stress measures, but the oil company was still not pleased with what they felt were the outcomes. As it turned out, they were looking for what I would call now a corporate marriage renewal program. They were looking for a re-engagement program, which in part turned on stress and satisfaction. And this was where our focus on re-engagement in making change successful came from. So the diagnostics, filtering through the skills, the tools you can offer, lead to a more focused and effective design. You know, I almost took this slide out. It really can be summarized. Everything I've shared so far with you is summarized at the bottom of this slide. Namely, win-win changeabilities are good. They're very basic human skills, and I hope most of our children have them for their futures. However, as stress consultants, as someone holding out to offer value in the corporate marketplace, the bridge between helping people and helping companies, joined at the hip, win-win benefit, comes through win-win problem solving. And I simply emphasize that you should look further into how win-win problem solving works. And in fact, by the way, throughout this presentation, I have offered you in the lower left-hand corner of many of these slides a URL directive where you can find more detailed information about how the diagnostics, win-win problem solving, how the stress of change model works. Many links are in this PowerPoint for your future reference. Point number 4 about synergy, ensuring that the change management program, whether it's ERP or otherwise, is fully win-win supported from the boardroom to the top floor. From the boardroom to the shop floor. This emphasis, aside from being essential to get practical results, has gradually become more aware of it. The importance of executive level buy-in. Having led the Institute's coaching practice for a number of years and doing a bit of executive coaching myself, there's no doubt that executives are just like us. They tend to minimize, if not deny, highly impactful changes. And what we've seen in terms of trends in executive commitment to making things work, you know, these are the people who are mandated to lead the charge in today's companies. Well, between 2008 and 2003, our Stress Pro profile across a number of executive coaching settings have shown that job commitment has declined by fully 19% over that 6-year time block. A significant, worrisome concern, as well as our experience with the Making Change Successful program, repeatedly highlights that if you want change management to work effectively, there must be synergy throughout the organization, and the key starting point to mobilize that is with the management team. In fact, the leverage for success in change really starts and ends with the executive team. So leverage is greatest, and so are the risks if they are not fully on board. I want to share several, I think, what do I have here, 5 or 6 guidelines as to how we increase executive buy-in and motivation. You know, the point number 2 on the slide is that executives can be a bit ambivalent about relying on junior staff more than just doing the work. And the observation of several investment bankers that I think I shared in the outline of this webinar that you downloaded, these investment bankers conclude that most change programs don't do too well because they're not well designed. In fact, many fail. Why most change management programs succeed is because the people made them succeed. Exploring this theme with executives is really the focus in the next 5 points I'm going to address. In beginning to open this up, whereby they can admit that the most junior frontline staff are every bit as important as their assistant vice presidents in total success, is I'll say to the management team, well, you know, you in this company have this thing called Vision 2016. It's a vision of what the company will look like having already hit its 2016 target. And I take the next step and ask them, well, of the people who directly report to you individually that you depend on, what are some of the traits? What are some of the things they did, how they contributed that led to this 2016 success? And invariably, they'll begin to mention one or more of the changeability skills. The same criteria that we saw in the bar chart towards the beginning of this webinar: engagement, satisfaction, commitment to results, etc. So they begin to surface change valuable traits. And then point 4 is leaders need followers. Although in our culture we focus a lot on leadership, and so we should, often this leads to a kind of management from the top, the rolling out, rolling down of the change program, with not a balanced roll up of the perception. Once a perception of the more junior staff, once the changes have been in place for 3 to 6 months, then invariably the junior staff, as in the case of the airline cargo agents, have very useful win-win proposals. Leaders need and should build in, through win-win problem solving, their followers, their team's inputs. Point 5 is in some ways the simplest and most powerful recommendation I can make. I've consistently found that when the executive team meeting breaks up, having discussed the change management program in detail, they go away and speak to their staff groups about the changes in ways that perhaps only overlap by 60%. The commonality is not all that great. So I encourage executives to develop a W5 plus H change storyline. The core message, preferably on one page, keyworded. What are the core messages about the changes they want to put forward consistently across their ranks, and emphasize rolling it down, producing at the vice presidential, assistant vice president, manager level, producing the appropriate version of a W5 plus H clear message. Because believe it or not, you've probably seen this, more junior staff say, gee, that's not what I heard, or my boss is not saying exactly that. Point 6, this we've already belabored, is that in change management, the devil is indeed in the details. If the frontline staff are not doing the small things right, the rest tends not to work. So most executives, when you take them sideways and say, just let's consider one or two of your more successful change initiatives, to what extent did staff ideas, creativity, initiative you hadn't called for really contribute to success? And they will acknowledge that about 30% of the success was contributed, at least, by the roll-up proposals from their staff. And finally, point 7 about buy-in and commitment being based in consequences. Several senior ERP consultants that I know quite well have said, you know, Richard, one of the main failings is that not all staff appreciate, well, they may appreciate that there are positive consequences if the changes are successful, but they don't seem to appreciate the fact that degrees of failure will also be recognized, that there are consequences at the personal KPI level, at the team KPI, and the corporate KPI levels for less than ideal success. And this may sound harsh to you, hopefully not. I found that most adults, most employees are quite adult, I should say, and are quite willing to accept the fact that there are consequences. They may not like them, but far too often senior managers become kind of weak in the knee and shilly-shally about the potential for negative as well as positive consequences. These 7 recommendations, I recommend them simply as a way for when you gain access to the boardroom, how to ensure that the buy-in to win-win problem solving is as true from their side as it has been supported by changeability skill. Now into our final slide about rollout strategy. Let's say you've designed, based on diagnostics, having a repositioned, repurposed toolkit, a program that the company has bought into, you've pilot tested it, now rollout. This is, I can't even begin to give you guidelines here. Most of you are as experienced as I am in doing training, learning, coaching. I'll simply highlight one variant that comes again, time and time again, as being most valuable. And this is called, we call it, the high ROI blended learning strategy. Because as you know, the major cost of training in today's company is not the consultants, the trainers. It's the employee time invested in being in a classroom or in one-to-one or group coaching. So being able, this is what led us several years ago to develop an e-learning program, a version of our Making Change Successful program, 5 modules for self-directed study. And what we do with that is we front-end it with a briefing for large groups of staff. It can be simply a 45-minute briefing, either live or or recorded, developing a focus on what's at stake, the benefits, all the way from rate of aging, which always gets people's attention, through to career development, etc. The aim is to motivate people to buy into the second stage, which is to take either our Stress Pro or Vitality Pro profile, which gives them personal, very personalized, confidential feedback as to their strengths and their risks, followed by the profile reporting, several quite concrete action recommendations for them, which then link them directly into the e-learning program to help them develop the 2 or 3 specific skills that will give them greatest benefit. Using this strategy, and sometimes this strategy is followed on by a 4th element, namely coaching, group or one-to-one coaching, but using the simple 3-component strategy, we've been able to reduce, we estimate, the total cost of learning to support a change management program by about 45% by respecting the employee time cost. Well, we've come to the end of our time together, and I just want to thank you. I'm very happy that you've joined with me today, and hopefully I've offered you some benefit. And if you'd like, we'll be following on very shortly with a brief Q&A session. Not just your questions, but I hope you'll share an idea or two with the rest of us in the group that I'm sure we can all learn from. Or if you have to go to your next meeting or whatever, please follow up with me either by email or telephone. I learn a lot from the employee groups I work with, coaching, training, but equally from my colleagues. And I hope we've started that process. Thank you again, and look forward to working with you at some point.